Welcome to podcast 21 in the books. Happy New Year.
That's
Hope everyone
right.
had a great holiday season. I know we're sneaking this one in under the gun to get it in January, but
Yeah.
great to be back on the pod. What we're talking about today is David Liggett, our fearless leader.
Hey.
Just got back from PTC,
Yes.
the Pacific
was tough.
Telecommunications
Hard.
Conference in Hawaii.
That's right.
And so we're going to talk a little about that, and we got some Hyperscale content that we had queued up for December that we didn't get to, that we want to talk about today. So if you haven't listened to it, check out podcast 20, which was our 2020 predictions.
So easy.
And 2019, which is, so 2019.
That's right.
But podcast 19 was 2019 wrap up.
And still worth listening to.
And
It's a
still
good
worth
one.
listening to.
Yeah.
Those two in combo are great content. So check those out. But coming up next, we're going to talk PTC and Hyperscale. Okay, so David, welcome back.
Thanks.
You look very sun-kissed and tan. I know you had a great time out there.
I think you're looking for sunburn.
Thank you for taking one for the team.
That was
and
hard,
going
like I
out
said.
to Hawaii for
Yeah.
PTC. So I do have some specific questions, but I want to say, and one quick over/under. The
Okay.
over/under on the number of C-level executives that
Yes.
you saw,
At PTC.
yes, at PTC, wearing a Hawaiian shirt,
Oh, man.
or doing the limbo, or
Okay.
with a Mai Tai in a little coconut cup.
Yes. What's the
Over/under
number?
is 7.5.
Oh, gosh, more.
Way over.
Yes. No,
I
I
was
would
being
say
generous.
I would say probably the first and the third, not the second.
Not doing the limbo.
There was not a lot of limbo. There might have been limboing going on. I was not
Okay.
present at those events, but no, there were a lot of Hawaiian shirts, and a lot of Mai Tais. But-
And like some data center conversations occurring.
Yes,
Incidentally.
many data center conversations occurring, and if you were there, the people that were there probably are laughing because, yeah, there were a lot of people out there. It's a great event, and there's people from all over the world. Obviously, it's an easy place to travel to in the sense of the destination is really fun, but. It is really a great midpoint if you think about like the U.S. and Asia Pac, and then there was actually a really strong contingent of people from Europe there as well. So it was awesome.
So those of you who aren't familiar, PTC is Pacific Telecommunications Council.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll just read quickly their mission statement here. It says, a global nonprofit membership organization promoting the advancement of information and communication technologies in the Pacific Rim, the most dynamic geography of the world, spanning over 40 nations.
Yeah.
And so, I think some of your thoughts were, if you just read the name, it says telecommunications, but it's really broadened. In fact, there were a ton of data center people there. And if you look at the attendee list, I looked at it, there were 2,000 attendees representing 900 companies from 68 countries.
Yeah.
Look at a big portion of those were, marked as one of their primary interests for going out there was data centers.
Yeah,
So
you bet.
It seems like a great meeting up. Again, as you realize, there's an easy draw.
Yeah.
But I think there's a content draw and there's a connection and networking draw that is
Absolutely.
very strong.
Yeah, and there's a lot of the things that if you're in the industry, a number of the events that we go to traditionally are pretty, either they're localized to a specific market or they're regionalized to a specific geography, and so this event just does a great job of bringing a lot of people from different places together, and to learn and to also just hear about what's happening in the market, which is of great value on a number of things. There are really three things for me that I took away from the time there, and just a lot of conversations with people in the industry here in the U.S., in Europe, in Asia, in other areas of the world, Latin America, India. And so I think, a couple of my takeaways that I was going to share with, people that were at the event, but also those that aren't, because I think it was such a good cross-reference of people as well as the ideas and the trends that are going on in different parts of the world, because they are different in different areas. But, the first one is just that connectivity is so important in the data center industry. And, really focusing on like at the local level, at the regional level, at the national level, now at the global level. I mean, it's very clear that network and connectivity, in my opinion, have become much more important today than they were a while ago. And as companies are trying to make decisions about their internet or their IT infrastructure, where they place it, a lot of that depends on what type of connectivity and network you're going to get in those areas.
And we've certainly heard from folks on both sides of the equation, customers and the providers, is that story is continually growing in importance.
Yeah.
It's where are you and where can you be?
Yeah,
and
sure.
How quickly can you be there?
Yeah.
And how reliably can you be there? So, that makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things that were talked about at PTC was, around the subsea cable growth and how that's really changed the market, what that's allowing companies to do related to where they want to grow and what areas they want to grow in, and how certain areas in different countries are becoming kind of the hubs for the subsea cables coming in. And so
we certainly saw that. I mean, last year, LA, Portland specifically, seeing, some either new or renewed interest just based on, their connectivity.
Yeah,
so
on the West Coast, East Coast,
you got what we already knew, but
you got like Virginia Beach, the kind of the Richmond area. Even there's some areas like in Manhattan, like Long Island, that are becoming continual areas for that. So anyway, it is very clear that this is a growing in importance as it relates to our industry. The second thing is that I took away, this is it's a global business. And as we focus on, at Data Center Hawk, we focus on different types of data center industry professionals that our services help. And so I just wanted to highlight, I think, the impact of the business being global, what that means to these different groups. So one is like the actual end user themselves. So the company that has IT infrastructure requirements, and they're either doing that on their own, they're either deploying it to a co-location facility, or they've got some sort of cloud environment that they are creating today. And so, the challenge for them globally is they've got to figure out how to make their IT infrastructure serve the needs of their business, which is challenging from a number of perspectives. And we talk about the challenge that users have of making a decision for today that impacts tomorrow when you don't know what tomorrow is, and so globally you're seeing that really mature. Data center operators, they've been expanding their portfolios globally over the last 3 years so that they're in a position to really serve clients. And they've done that through acquisitions. They've done that through land banking. There's just been a number of things that we've seen them do, especially if you want to serve like enterprise or large cloud service providers. But you've got to have a global portfolio. I mean, that's very clear today. Investors, if you want to provide equity or debt to data center projects, you have to have a global approach, meaning you've got to be able to understand the dynamics of, one region to the next, one country to the next, one market to the next, on a global basis.
Do you see large differences in development costs from country to country? U.S. versus Europe, U.S. versus Asia. Is that a deciding factor for these folks?
Yeah, I think that's one of them, is understanding those development costs. And in certain markets, you've got, in certain countries, you just have different challenges to develop, any type of real estate, but certainly the dynamics around the data center developments related to the amount of power and the amount of connectivity and all the security, all the things that it takes to build something that customers are going to find attractive. That's the dynamics between market to market certainly can be different. That's a good question. And then, the brokers and consultants, it really goes back to the commentary on users. But if you want to advise a client, well, you've really got to understand what their needs are. And because it's changing globally, you've got to understand how these markets relate to one another. You might have a customer that has a data center deployment in Chicago, and they have one too in Frankfurt and in Singapore. And you've got to be able to know how those markets operate and function, because clients expect you to. So, again, the business it's a global business, and it's only growing that way. And then the other takeaway that I had from PTC was really around just service maturity growth. So what I mean by this is, the data center user community is requiring more from the data center operator community today than they ever have before. And over the last 5 to 10 years, the data center operators have really listened to what data center users need and have adjusted their services to meet those needs and to try to, as Wayne Gretzky would say, skate to where the puck's going to be, not to where it is today. Mm-hmm. And so a number, like I just brought up 3 examples of data center operators that have done something in the last 90 days that illustrate this. One is, and these are all public announcements, but one is Equinix. At the beginning of the year, they acquired Packet, or they're in works to acquire Packet, which is a bare metal automation platform. So basically, the goal here is to speed up efficiencies around hybrid multi-cloud deployments. So I think they're looking at their business and wanting to add a service that helps their customers grow faster within their platform, which I think is really smart. Aligned Energy, which is a data center operator here in the U.S. in areas like Dallas, Phoenix, Salt Lake, Northern Virginia. But they announced a partnership with Packet Fabric, different than the group I mentioned before, where they're basically providing customers with additional network and cloud connectivity options from their facilities. And then QTS is another example of a company that has taken Megaport, which is a cloud connectivity service, and has added it to a number of their facilities as well. So I think it actually, all these things show the importance of connectivity, which goes back to the first point. But what you're seeing is the data center operator community, their service is growing, and it will only help them with users that they have just become stickier over time and increase their business opportunities. So those are my 3 takeaways from PTC 2020. Number 4 is wear sunscreen. The sun around the equator.
It's more, you're closer to the sun, right?
That's right.
Or you're,
I don't
anyways.
know.
One of the things I was thinking, and this is a little bit off the cuff, but not to be too political here, but, did you get a sense of how these operators are viewing like China as a user, as a provider, as a, massive nation?
Sure.
How is that, playing on those discussions?
Yeah,
over there?
I think, China and other countries with large populations represent a big opportunity for companies that want to increase the data center supply in a market and really get to areas that have untapped opportunities. And so, that market I think is eyed as very attractive. There's some challenges with, some countries that have different regulations. They see the world differently. So from a business perspective, I think you've got to weigh that into what the opportunities really are, because things work differently there. But you certainly have seen, or, if you think about over the last 2 years, we have seen some data center providers and users make some investments there, and, they're starting to pay off. So it's a longer game in some of those markets, but I think if you've got the capital and you've got the time and you can invest there, down the road, those companies will look back and be glad that they did.
Sure. Again, like you said, billion-plus people.
Yes.
That are all becoming increasingly technologically oriented.
Yes.
So there's certainly an opportunity there,
Yeah.
and I think you're right. There's probably some, and this is an armchair opinion, but
Sure.
There's certainly some challenges there.
Yeah.
So. Okay, thanks again for those thoughts.
Yeah,
Encourage everyone to
PTC.
check out PTC again. I think it's attractive for a lot of reasons, but just the folks you can meet there, the insight in the industry you get. It sounds like you had a great time. I know you brought Leanne out, and y'all had some good time afterwards.
Yeah, it was awesome.
So
it was
I
good
think
stuff.
there was some snorkeling was done.
There was
some dolphin watching was done.
There dolphin watching. There was a sunset cruise that went on.
So much fun was had by all.
There we go. So it was great.
Much celebration. Okay, so next thing we want to talk about, again, like we said, we had this content queued up for 2020 or 2019. Didn't get to it. Here we go. So you guys, the listeners, benefit here. So just talk about, hyperscale trends we're seeing.
Yep.
Again, it's the topic that we never seem to tire of talking about, and people don't seem to get tired of hearing about it. So we're going to keep.
Not yet.
Hey, you got to give the people what they want.
That's right.
So again, I think it's helpful just to remind what do we mean when we say hyperscale, and so we go back to an interview we did with Tad Greason, Chief Hyperscale Officer for QTS.
Yep.
And his definition was really, some people limit their definition of hyperscale to mean one of a very small handful of companies that's going to just show up at your door and stroke a check for 15, 20, 30 megawatts.
Yep.
But he really broadens that definition to say, there's another 20 to 30 companies that will take down 1 to 2 megawatts at a time, and over time they're going to end up with a 15 to 20 megawatt portfolio.
Yes.
And he really considers that hyperscale.
Yeah.
And his definition really is, scalability. So, hey, can you meet my need today and where we think we're going to be in 4 or 5 years?
Yep.
Speed to deliver.
Yep.
And so can you meet the need quickly and on the time frame that we need? Economics, hey, the price is right. Yep. It's got to be right.
Yep.
And then location, right? So they've got a strategy for where they need to be as well.
Yeah.
And that's part of the, what we're going to talk about here in a minute. So, hey, I would say, like, I know you've got some great thoughts on this. What is your view of the market, January 28th, 2020, and what you're seeing start to develop and unfold over the next 12 to 24 months?
Good question. I think, too, you have to understand in our market that, prior to 2016 and 2017, like the requirements, this market didn't exist. The hyperscale market that you're discussing and Tag was talking about. I mean, it was traditionally these companies had always had the economies of scale that it made sense to go do it themselves. So there was a massive shift in probably 2016 when we started to see that beginning to change. And so you did a great job. That hyperscale market, there's that 10 to 20 companies, whatever that number is, that's buying in big chunks, and the size has grown over time. And so it's a fascinating market. In fact, I would tell you it's the one thing that's probably impacted the overall global data center market more than anything in the last 3 years is this exact opportunity. These companies doing what they've done. So, here's some of the things that I think are happening today. And, I don't think they'll change that much over the next 12 months. So I think these are probably, good for the date today, which is the 28th, you said.
I get that right. Thank you. Okay.
Yes. And then also, it's probably going to ring true for the next 12 months. So, the first thing is that there's a dual strategy that exists with hyperscale data center users. And what I mean by that is there are those companies that lease the infrastructure, which is what we've talked about, has changed the opportunity here in the U.S. and in other international markets as well, but they will also own and operate their own data center facilities as well. And so over time, we've watched those levers go up and down, and in certain areas. In 2018, we set some records from an absorption standpoint here in the U.S. In 2019, there was different records set in other international markets, but this dual strategy is taking place, and it's happening.
I think we've seen it like in Phoenix, Northern California, especially Chicago, even, and then like Northern Virginia, of course.
Yeah, here in the U.S.
Some of those are the markets where we're seeing, like you said, that play out, and just a lot of activity on both sides of that equation.
Yeah, so, and it looks like a data center, one of those large data center users might have 50 to 100 megawatts deployed on their own in facilities they own and operate, and they might have 50 to 100 megawatts deployed with data center operators where they lease the infrastructure, and it's in a building that the data center operator owns themselves, and the user is basically a customer or a tenant in that building. And so it's very unique because both are very capital costs a lot of capital. Obviously, the building on your own infrastructure model is capital more up front. The leasing gives you time to deploy that capital over time. But it certainly is a strategy that we see today. So that's one of the things that is happening, and I don't see that changing. I don't think they will declare, hey, we are doing this from now on, and we will never lease infrastructure again, or all we're doing is leasing, and we'll never build and own and operate the data center facilities themselves. So the second thing I think that's certainly on the radar for 2020 is that the international markets are eyed for growth, and so. In 2018, as I mentioned, the U.S. had one of the largest absorption years ever. Absorption is just a fancy term for demand. So it's how we measure how much leasing took place in a certain period of time. And so in 2018, it was a record number in the U.S. In 2019, in the U.S., it was more moderate. And I think we've talked about on our previous podcast, which you can listen to on 2019, which Mike mentioned before, it met what we thought it was going to do. But in 2019 we saw large amounts of absorption levels in Europe, and certainly think that will continue in 2020, and in other international markets. I mean, typically in every data center market and country is different as it relates to how mature they are. And this is not an insult to any one area, but there's just the reality when you have 10 data center operators in one market that have been doing this for 20 years and they know what they're doing, typically they're going to have very mature facilities. These are tier 3 plus facilities. They have high security, their services, they're very competitive. And so then when you go into markets that don't, there's a reason a lot of times those providers aren't there. You know, it might be that there's not enough demand. It might be that it's too hard to get there. You know, they're only focused in one region. They're not focused in. So I certainly think there's a big opportunity internationally this year.
Yeah, I think from, you know, just from the data side of things, what we're tracking is, you know, certainly seeing that play out in places like Frankfurt, London, Dublin, which is, you know, got its own, you know, set of characteristics that make it unique. So I think, your comments are right on.
Yeah.
I think we've seen that backed up with the data as those markets continue to grow. And like you said, I think maybe a larger focus on leasing on the international side from the large hyperscale groups. But like you said, not an insane swing and not like, you know, massive shifts in the landscape, but certainly growth in those international markets.
And that'll happen in 2020. Another really interesting trend in the hyperscale development is around just that timelines are key to decision making. I mean, I think maybe more important than price, and I know some people are going to be like, what are you talking about? It's all about how much it costs. You know, cost is one thing in these deals, but you have some very sophisticated users that understand cost and, returns on capital investment. And so, you know, what is certainly important, and sometimes more important, is can you meet the timelines that they have? Especially, I mean, you said it right at the beginning on the scalability piece. You know, you've got to be able to meet day one capacity and then scale up over time. That means you need a big supply chain. I mean, there's not a data center operator today that's focused on hyperscale growth that's not talking about their supply chain, and that they can meet the demands over time because they've spent the time to work with suppliers that can help them meet their timelines. And so, the other trends that you're seeing from the data center operator community, things like land banking. So they're buying, large tracts of land. And I think it's important to remember that they might have plans to build 100 megawatts on a, whatever it is, 100-acre site, but that is going to come over a long period of time. So the capital investment is, in my opinion, it's smart because it's just positioning themselves as proactive. That's one of our key values here at Data Center Hawk. And it's certainly one that you see a number of data center operators working on, is just proactively thinking, hey, where's the industry going to go? And when it goes there, we want to be ready.
And again, we've talked about, at length on this podcast about just it's not a guessing game. It's an educated guessing game about how are you going to sell? Who are you going to sell to? When are you going to get the deal done? And so there's just this. It's not frenetic, but there's some pressure. You can feel, you can hear it when you talk to folks of like, hey, we've got capital, we need to allocate it, but we don't want to just build a center and just wait. Yeah. And in a prayer that it's going to lease up, when we want it to. And so everyone's trying to sign the pre-lease and,
Yeah,
so.
And that actually brings up a really good point that we didn't think about before. But, we've talked a lot about just how these deals are structured. And, I think you're starting to see a number of people look at, the powered shell game. And we've talked about this before. I mean, this is all just deployment of capital and how much capital you want to spend without having something completed. And, there's a number of groups that are really trying to understand, hey, are there opportunities where we can just acquire the land and build a shell, which, in the data center world, that's just obviously a fortified building that typically has power running to it, and some connectivity, and then the equipment has not yet been installed. But basically, for timeline purposes, if you can get to that point, you're 3 to 6 months ahead of other groups, sometimes even a year, because people don't have a site acquired yet. And when you acquire a site, you have to go through the due diligence process, all the things that it takes to do this. So this is like kind of real estate 101 as it relates to how to position yourselves to be in a spot where when the demand comes, you've done a lot of work ahead of time.
And that kind of brings us into the last thing we want to talk about, just about where we've seen those things happen.
Yes.
And in some of those bets that you made, that people made in the last 5 years,
yes,
have paid off.
Absolutely.
And I think we have a mutual friend that, we won't say his name, but spent a very long time investing his time and energy in this industry with no return whatsoever. Yeah. And then at the end of, I think it was 4 years, landed a very, very large deal. Yeah. And it made all of the previous 4 years worth it.
Yeah,
and so I think maybe there's some champagne bottles being popped in some of these markets.
Yeah, sure. And
sighs of relief.
Yeah, it's a long game, and we'll get to the fourth one here in a minute, but there's, we'll talk to some people in the space or investors in the space that want to get in, that have been like general like real estate investors, and they'll ask us about, hey, should we invest in this deal or whatever it might be, and I try and just be very realistic that this is not a 6 to 12 month experience. I mean, if you want to be in this space, you have to be committed to the time that it takes to really understand the market and do deals. And if you make a mistake in this space, it's about 10 times more expensive than your traditional office market, industrial market, obviously depending on deal size. But so it's, I've always actually almost discouraged investment unless you have the patient capital, which I know is probably makes people laugh because no capital's ever patient. But then also just the patience to understand the market and move along with it. Okay, so the fourth trend that I see really right now in the data center hyperscale market is that smaller deployments are driving growth around key business initiatives. So you brought up at the beginning, there's a number of companies that have been focused on, I will even say like, let's say 10 megawatts and higher where the deployments are. Some that come in and they've got a 6 meg deployment and it's got to grow by 6 megs over a period of time. Some that, hey, I'm going to come in with 20 and then it's got to grow by another 20. Those are fewer and far between. But over the last 6 to 12 months, we've seen, a number of like 4 to 10 megawatt deployments in markets that traditionally we haven't seen a lot of activity in. And it's my take on those type of requirements that, these large companies that are doing them either have a key customer that needs to be in a general region to support something that they're doing with that customer, or there's some sort of network play related to why they've got to be where they are, or that it fits their portfolio to be in that region with that deployment. And so you're starting to see a number of requirements that are illustrating how the market is changing. And so I'd say, hey, 2016, 2017, we weren't seeing like large transactions. Then we started seeing them. Now those transactions have changed, and there's a smaller subset of those that are happening, which I think is really interesting. And it's created some demand in markets that traditionally haven't seen that type of demand.
And if I'm in one of those markets, if I'm an operator in one of those markets, like I'm greatly encouraged. Or if I'm even an operator in a market that didn't get a large lease land, in 2019, I'm still encouraged. And you think a 20 megawatt requirement in Northern Virginia becomes two 10 megawatt requirements that went somewhere else. And if you just project that forward, maybe the trend is now that it becomes 4, 5 megawatt requirements is that continue to just spread and get this coverage, and that everyone's going to get fed at some point. But again, we know markets that have not seen the large deal land. Our home front, Dallas, being one of those. Sure. But I'd be encouraged just by that overall trend that there's going to be a continued diversification amongst the larger buyers, and then as their strategies evolve, and they're going to eventually need, if you think to its final end, there's going to be space everywhere, and there's going to be data centers everywhere. So to some extent, there'll be continued coverage to increase.
Yeah, and it should encourage not just the providers or the but I mean the service providers in those markets, the cabling companies, the power companies, the groups that are investing resources from a business development standpoint in those different areas to go, hey, there's going to be opportunities in different markets moving forward. That's certainly a trend I think that will stay consistent in 2020. And, and it just illustrates, I mean, I mentioned it before, just how the business is changing. So again, the 4 trends that I see right now, there's a dual strategy that's existing among hyperscale users. The international markets are eyed for growth in 2020. Meeting the timeline is one of the most important parts of the decision-making process. for users and providers being able to do that. And then smaller deployments are driving growth around key business initiatives. So watch for those things in 2020 to continue, because I think they will.
Our thanks, David, for those great thoughts on PTC and Hyperscale. So again, just as a reminder, you can submit, if you have questions or comments for future topics you'd like us to cover, go ahead and put those in here, YouTube, or anywhere on social media, LinkedIn, we're about there. Additional, we put a lot of this content into blog format, so you can share it and read it if you don't have, the time or the inclination to listen to it as on the podcast. So, David, what else we got teed up for the rest of 2020?
Yeah, so I'm, excited. I mean, we'll be doing more podcasts, so this is not the last you've seen of Mike Netzer and David Liggett. No, we'll be around doing different podcasts around the content that obviously is impacting data center users, providers, investors, consultants. So that will be really what we cover from a content standpoint. And then we'll continue our Hawk Talk discussions that we have with industry leaders. So hopefully those listening know that, we sit down consistently with C-level and leadership executives from data center operator community, as well as data center leaders in the space, and talk to them about trends that are changing the market, how they see their company growing, where they're really trying to position themselves to meet users in the future. So I'm really excited about those. Those are always, I know we, always have good feedback from those discussions, and it's great content from our standpoint just to get to talk to the people that are really shaping this industry. So, those things for us, I'm really excited about. We actually have, I don't know if we've talked about this, but we have a track where we're going to really work to educate people on our YouTube channel. So we're working right now to look back on all of the content that we've done over the last 2 years and pull out really good descriptions on what's taking place specifically, at a very elementary level. What is a data center? What is co-location? What are cloud services? Things like that, as well as, market overviews. Why is the Seattle data center market attractive? Here's a 30-second video discussion on why. Why is Hyperscale changing the market today? Here's 30 seconds to a minute on why that's taking place. So that will be taking place too. So we'll be busy in 2020.
Cannot wait to see that additional stuff. Look forward to that on all of our channels. See you guys next time.